Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session recording, 203. My name is Dani Beaumont and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team, and I'm happy to have you with us today. This session will be available on YouTube after the fact and is being streamed, if all goes well, on Facebook Live. In today's session, we're going to take a more advanced tack towards responsive design and fixed breakpoints. So trying to think a little bit, just to give you a little bit of background. To make life a little easier, I actually have picked up a template that you could buy if you wanted to from Muse Themes. It is a good example of a site that's built in Muse that has fixed breakpoints. Before I dig in too deeply, I'm going to do what I usually do and just check technical bits here. All right, I'm going to keep going. Facebook Live is always a mystery to me a little bit, but I don't want to waste too much time. Okay, as usual, I need staff. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to trust that this is hitting Facebook Live as well. If you have questions as we go along, if you're watching via screen share with Zoom, you're welcome to put it into the chat pod. If you're on Facebook Live, please just add it into the comments. I will swing back and see if I can address some of those questions as they come up during the session. So in this site, let's just do a quick compare. Let me just come up with a good example here. I've been playing with the Pigeon website that we use for Adobe Muse lately, and this is a site that is using fluid breakpoints. So as I look at the content on the site, I can tell it's a fluid breakpoint site because when I press and drag the edge of the browser, text is flowing within containers, objects are scaling, images are scaling, both height and width. I've got that terrible gap that I need to fix here. But this is an example of a fluid breakpoint site. And the rule within Muse when you're working with a fluid breakpoint is basically when your design breaks, it's time to add a breakpoint. So when elements in your fluid layout start to no longer fit, for example, this wheel is getting awfully close to the text that's here. When it gets too close for comfort, something will happen. So for example, the text begins to flow to get out of the way. Or we jump to another breakpoint where the size of the image is different. So many of you are probably familiar with that mindset. We teach an awful lot about that with Muse. Then there's the world of fixed breakpoints. And let's look at a fixed breakpoint site. If I jump over to this build site that was built by the Muse Themes folks, it is a fixed breakpoint site. And as I scroll down on the site, what you'll notice is there is content on the page, but you're not going to see any of that content scaling or flowing within a text container. It's going to remain fixed in height and width until things start to get crowded. So you'll notice that the white space on the left and right here is starting to get tighter. And when I get to where that's uncomfortably tight, rather than scale objects, the design choice here is to create a new layout, a new breakpoint that starts to have white space again on the sides. When I get to where that gets complicated, it jumps to a different layout. But notice each time as I come into each of these layouts, nothing's scaling, nothing's resizing, it's jumping. So let's talk about why you might want to use a fixed breakpoint site. From what I hear from folks that have been developing sites for a long time, lots of hand coders, people that are building complex systems or are familiar with a hand coding environment, they'll often build a site with fixed breakpoints until they get to the smallest breakpoint that's for use on a smartphone device. And because that smaller breakpoint is pretty unknown, it's hard to know what that minimum width for a mobile device will be. Coders will make that smallest breakpoint a fluid breakpoint to handle all of those smartphone devices. I think that from an engineering standpoint, from a coding standpoint, fixed breakpoints tend to be easier to handle. From a visual design point, they're quite easy to handle as well, especially when they go hand in hand with the idea of tile-based design or grid structure for responsive design. And the idea there is that, and you'll see this, you'll start to see patterns if you're new to the web when you look for it, and there's a whole lot of, in the world of tile-based design, there's a whole lot of elements, design elements. This site is a perfect example where you'll have an image and you'll have a text object, but that text object can easily go side to side. Let's look here for a moment. So notice I've got 3 images, 3 blocks of text. As I resize in this fixed breakpoint way, what happens, if I'm lucky here, is when I start to run out of room, the design adjusts. So in this instance, I think it's just getting a little smaller. If I drag it down again, when things are getting crowded, maybe I'm not going to grab a good example of this here. When I get to this smallest breakpoint, notice that rather than trying to keep resizing the little elements there, they're more of a grid structure, a tile system, where you're stacking the tiles on top of each other to handle that. If we go to, I think it's the services area, let's see. We've got other examples here where as I come in, things get crowded. They're going to cuddle up closer as long as they can, and then jump to a single card structure. So in Muse, personally, you have to know that we don't know of any other tool that allows you to visually design free-form websites that are fully responsive. So in some instances, engineering and our interface design folks will come up with a way to, a mental metaphor to communicate how you handle fixed and fluid breakpoints. It sometimes pans out really well for us, but sometimes it can be a little confusing. So this session is, as I mentioned, it's kind of a specific deep dive, and it's focused on how you can plan out a site for this fixed and fluid workflow using the Adobe Muse tool. I gave this session about 4 or 5 months ago, and it was probably the highest viewed site in that time frame. So I figured it was a good time to actually do it again. So I want to go ahead and build out a site and explain this idea of fluid and fixed breakpoints specifically. So let's go on over into Adobe Muse. And I do have the finished design from Muse Themes that I might refer to once we get a little bit more done in this site. But I want to start from scratch first. And mentally, you can pretty much imagine we're building out this site in its finished form. So what I'll do to begin with is I'm going to pull that on File to a new site. And interestingly enough, if you're like me, you kind of blow by this new site dialog. There's actually some information that's happening here. It's really subtle around fluid and fixed breakpoints that you'll want to start to notice. I'm going to click this little down arrow and expose some of the advanced settings. But what you'll notice is by default within Muse, using the new Muse application, we're going to default to a fluid width responsive design page. By the way, before I forget, yesterday we pushed out a dot release. This dot release has performance improvements, and it also has lots of bug fix improvements. I highly encourage you to make sure you go and download that. The way you're going to do it is go to the Creative Cloud, switch over to Applications, ignore the fact that I haven't updated some of these other apps, but you'll see Adobe Muse here in the list as an available update. Be sure to download that update. I think you'll really enjoy some of the publishing, speed enhancements, and the stability and bug fix improvements for sure. Okay, so using the current version of Muse, by default it says fluid width. Now I know that I want to work with a fixed breakpoint site, so I'm going to go ahead and make a switch here under fluid width, but I want you to keep an eye on the right here. It says max page width, and it also allows you to define min width. This is because when you're defining a fluid breakpoint, you're defining a range. You're saying what's the largest it should be and what's the least that it should be for that fluid range. If I come into the fluid width dropdown and change it, notice on the left how things are going to change, and also the min width value here. I'm going to switch over to fixed width, and I no longer am defining, obviously, the mid width, and I'm defining more an absolute page width. So this is not that range any longer. It's really literally a page. And it personally, maybe I'm slow on the uptake, but this mentality, this mindset took me a long time and a lot of engineering discussions with the team to understand. So I'm going to really drill in on this pretty heavily as we go along. This is where if you watch me on YouTube, you can scrub to where I get to the point. I understand. For page width, I'm going to start with the largest breakpoint that I want to work with. And I'm going to set that to be 1200 pixels in width. And I want you to also notice the non-intuitive user interface I'm about to show you for a moment. So page width is going to be 1200. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So Muse takes me into the site plan, where I see I've got a default home page here, I've got a default master page. Depending on whether or not I'm dropping in breakpoints for my navigation or individual pages, I may or may not start on the home page or the master. Let's go ahead and begin on the master. So I'm going to double click to select that. Now, if you've not worked with breakpoints much in the past, you're going to want to make sure that when you pull that under view, you're showing breakpoints so that they're visible. You should see the little purple bar here at the top. Now, if you remember, I said I wanted to set up a page and I wanted it to be 1200 pixels in width. Now, Muse is trying to indicate a 1200 pixel width page, but it does it in a rather confusing way. The first thing you'll notice is if you're kind of quick on the uptake, the icon has subtly changed. It no longer has arrows on the left and right indicating that this is a fluid breakpoint, because it's a fixed breakpoint. But rather than defining that min width value here with browser area, I get the literal page that I'm working on. So what we're trying to do is indicate to you, this is your active design area. Anything that falls outside this design area is going to be in the browser and not on the active page. Now, to make this a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and add some color to my page value. I think it helps mentally understand what we're doing here. So I'm going to pick a scary color. Let's make that a little less scarier and tint it back. What you can see now is, although I have visible here a little bit of browser area, that's my active page content. Okay, I've got that as my first breakpoint. I'm going to go in and add a few fixed breakpoints. And for the smallest breakpoint, I'm going to define it as a fluid breakpoint. So to do that, I can grab the scrubber here until I get to the next marker area, but it's hard to be precise in that way. Instead, I'm going to right-click here in the breakpoint bar, and I'm going to select Add Breakpoint. And I want to go to the next one down. Now, Muse has a rule where you can't actually have two breakpoints within, I think, about 25 pixels of one another. So it's kind of suggesting an odd value to me here for breakpoint width. Notice that it's defaulting to fixed width because I've said I want this site as a whole to be a fixed width site. I set that first breakpoint at 1200. The next one I want to do is going to be about 1000, and I'll click OK. And now notice I've got that first breakpoint at 1200. When I click on it, actually if I click back out there at 1200, there's my actual page for the largest breakpoint. I now have another one at 1000 pixels. Let's do one more at 800 fixed width. And I'm going to go ahead and add the last one, and this should be my mobile device. I'll go ahead and set that one at 600, and I'm going to click OK. And if you're doing this, I don't know if it's a bug or if it's my inability to understand the world. Because I know this is going to be a fluid width smallest breakpoint, I could select it here. I've not had a lot of success with that. Muse gets confused and I become more confused. So I'm going to begin by setting my smallest breakpoint as 600 pixels fixed width, and I'll click OK. And then what I want to do is come back to that smaller breakpoint and right click and bring up the breakpoint properties. And I want to come in here. Notice that I've got a breakpoint width of 800 and a page width of 600. Let's change this to be fluid width. I'm going to set that smaller breakpoint width to be 600 with a minimum width of about 380, which is kind of a common mid-width. Some folks will say 320. which I think is like the iPhone 1. 380 is somewhat the minimum width of most smartphone devices that are out there. And I'll click OK. So I now have that smallest breakpoint with a min width. And notice that it has the arrows indicating that that's a fluid breakpoint. I kind of lost my 800 pixel breakpoint here, so let's go ahead and add that again. I'm going to add a breakpoint, make sure it's fixed width, and let's try that at 800 pixels and click OK. All right, I now have a pretty good range. And if you're focused on the pink area here, my active page content is here for 1200, 1000. Again, very misleading. I'm looking at the browser area, and the value that's registering here is the browser outside that page. And if I get to my smallest breakpoint, I have that min width of 380. And notice that the pink is filling up the entire container. It's not showing browser area because it is a fluid breakpoint. Okay, now that I have some of this in place, let's start to look a little bit at how I'm going to lay out my tile-based content and how I can look at the way things behave in the browser as I do this work. We'll leave these lovely pink page background just for reference for now. And I'm going to go into the Creative Cloud library. I created some blocks of content that I borrowed from that build website from Muse Themes, just to make my work a little quicker as I start to build out this page content. I'm going to pause and take a look at Facebook Live and see if the world is happening here. It is. Excellent. And we've got a few comments. I'm just going to take a look. Marty might, uh-oh, here we go with sound. Okay. Marty, my trip to India is on Sunday for a week. I'm going to go see the Muse team, so I'm getting ready for it. Not yet. Jorgen is asking where to find portfolio themes for starting a designer or an architect. If you go to muse.adobe.com and click on the resources tab, there's a whole list of vendors that supply themes. Not in there is a company called Theme Forest. That's a very mixed bag of templates, but there's a lot of content there. And there's also some really terrific folks that develop both Muse themes and widgets, and I encourage you to go check them out there. Madi's asking for a better mobile menu and a non-follow external link. Mobile menu, Madi, you may have already seen this, but if you go to the widget directory and search for menu, there is a sample set. I could try to show this at the end, but there's a sample set of free examples for how to build mobile menus. We know it's not as easy as it should be. We're working on a concept to add a default menu window. Can't swear to exactly when it will make the builds, but it's on our short yes list if that's encouraging. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but this comment area is a great place for me to see any questions as they come along. Also, if you're in the Zoom session, you can keep an eye on chat, and I will throw it in there. I've got a question. It might be Sarah. Is saying that she is confused about how text is acting between breakpoints. Let's take a look at that. I find that little icon to be incredibly confusing over here, the one that indicates text across breakpoints. So I'm with you. Let's cover that as we work as well. Okay, so I want to start with just some text and images pretty quickly here. So maybe one more question. Chat's flashing at me. You're welcome. Okay, let's just get some content here on the page. So I'm going to drag content onto the canvas. And let's zoom out a little bit. I'm going to get rid of these gradations. I don't really need them for the design. And I'll take what's left and just move it into place. Now, as you work with responsive design sites and you think about this idea of tiles that move around or just resizing content, there's a couple keyboard commands that I'm probably going to get wrong before I get it right in this session, but they make it much easier to start to bulk move content around. The first is something we added when we deliver responsive design. I always have to call it the vertical love handle, which is different. This is the vertical move handle. And it does allow you to take any content at any point in the site and select it, and then using that handle, move everything from that point all the way up or down on the site. You can also double click on that vertical move handle and it will select everything at that point so that you could delete it by double clicking there. So that's one nice productivity feature. Another thing I want to work with here, now as I mentioned, we're on fixed breakpoints. I could come to this object and suggest that it be text that's responsive with. To be honest, it's not going to flow. It's not going to be fluid because I'm on a fixed breakpoint. There is no fluidity to that breakpoint. So there's no real merit to doing that. I could do it just if it makes life simpler for me, but I'm going to come on in and select all of the text objects and just make sure that they're set to be fixed height and width so that we all are on the same page. I'm going to select all of the images, make sure that they're also fixed in height and width. I'm going to make sure these objects aren't pinned at all to start with. When in doubt, just don't pin it. And then if it moves in an odd way, pin it. But both the testing folks and the engineers sort of advise to pin when you need to. This is not so much around the odd behaviors of Muse as it is the rules, I would say the laws of the web, and how we're generating that code. All right, so I have some objects here now. What I want to do is just play around a little bit. So the first mental model you want to have as you're working, and you can even use guides to do this, is when you're working in the world of fixed breakpoints, you're always going to need enough margin on either side to accommodate the distance between that current breakpoint and the next smaller breakpoint. I don't know how else to really describe that. But as I'm looking at this 1200 breakpoint object, I've got browser on the side, which is great. And then I know that my next breakpoint is going to happen about 100 pixels in, 200 pixels in fact. So to make my life easier, I can come on in and just drop a little guide on both the left and the right so that I literally know how far in my content needs to come to assure that it's not going to get chopped off in my design. And now I can come in and start to play with my layout. If I wanted to maximize my work, I'm going to want a little bit of white space on either side, but I'm going to want to stay inside the guides that I've just dropped. I can come in and select a block of text, for example, here. And you'll notice there's different selection handles. Squares indicate individual items in a group that are selected. If I were to drag right here, it would resize just this container. But when I select a group of objects, there tend to be these cute little diamonds at each of the corners. And dragging a diamond out will resize all of the selected objects. So kind of a nice way to make that handle really well. Now, as I work, I can come in and group these objects and then make sure that the spacing between those objects are automatically handled. I'm going to go ahead and fine tune a little bit just visually. Notice as I drag up, I may or may not get guides that indicate how tightly these objects are aligned and if I'm in good shape. We're going to eyeball it for now. Get this guy up a little bit further. Okay, so we've got a pretty good set. One trick when you don't want to bother moving your footer objects lower is to just create a little larger container for your bottom object. That probably is going to not do me any favors, so I'm going to skip that for now. I can go on in. Actually, I'm on the wrong page, as many of you have probably noticed. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that off the canvas. Let's get rid of those guides. And let's just be a little bit more respectful here. Give myself a bit of a footer. I'm going to go back out to my site plan, jump where I belong here on my individual page. And you'll notice that I have these little triangles. Those are indicating that I have breakpoints on my master. Now, you have the ability when you're working you really want to think of sites as almost like an X and Y axis. To a large extent, the breakpoints that you define on a master really have to do with your header content and your footer content, that which is going to be constant across a number of sites. So in a lot of ways, you may have a desktop layout, a tablet layout, and a phone layout in your master. because you'll have different navigation for desktop, tablet, and phone. I made a mistake, and I went ahead and put those all on my master. So I'm going to show you a nice shortcut to fixing that mistake. I copied content from the master. And when I bring it back here, if I pull down under Edit, I can paste it in place, which would be great. It would position it exactly where I wanted it to be. I can also paste and create breakpoints. This is a real lazy way to say, you know, the breakpoints on one page, I want to bring them over to another page. So if I select paste and create breakpoints, notice that it's dropping the breakpoints and the content there. I could even delete the content I've just pasted and have the breakpoints carry over. So it's just a nice, you can grab any object from a page that has breakpoints you like, paste it onto the canvas, delete that object, and you'll carry over the breakpoints. Not to confuse folks much here, but I'm going to go back now to my master, and I'm just going to strip out these breakpoints. I want to stick with what we have. You know what? I'm not. Let's keep life simple. Okay. I'm going to go back out to my individual page, and we'll keep the breakpoints the same. I'm going to go to the largest breakpoint, and I've got that content now. So we're a little bit back on track. With the content somewhat well spaced, I want to try to maximize my layout, and I'm going to drag those guides again to indicate where the next smallest breakpoint is in my design. So I've got it here and here, and I've got some nice white space between those objects. That's great. Next thing I want to do is go ahead and apply this now to my next breakpoint. So I think it was Sarah had a question. She was confused a little bit about typography and how this type tool works. I don't like the icon. It drives me crazy, but it's a toggle that allows you to say, look, if I change the size of the name Peter Mac on an individual breakpoint like the phone, when I make that change, I want to make sure that that text change applies across all the breakpoints. That's, I believe, the little T's. Format text across all breakpoints. Usually, you're going to want to have unique text settings per breakpoint. So if I'm on the phone, the text might be rather large. If I'm on a desktop device, the text could be smaller. So for that, I'm going to toggle and make sure that the big T is visible. Which allows me to create unique text attributes per breakpoint. So for the desktop layout, I'm happy with what I've got. This is looking pretty reasonable. I'm going to go ahead and, for good measure, whenever you have a lot of breakpoints, it's easy to have individual elements kind of break across the other layouts. So as you're working, if you're playing with breakpoints, moving things around, and things kind of get out of alignment, what you can do is select objects. See if I do that again. Select objects on the canvas, and then just come in. Let's just do a select all. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select in the menu here, copy size and position to all breakpoints. That's going to kind of make sure that across all the breakpoints, the objects on the canvas are really positioned as I see them. Although the width of the page is going to change, they're going to stay pretty solid there. Now, there was another option that came up. Let's say as I'm working, I do go to another breakpoint. If I jumped in here, and I have this swell idea that my selection is off here. This is, yeah, it's a little funny. Notice my text is up here, but my selection area is being a little weird. Let's say I decide I want to experiment and make this headline kind of big there. And I give it a go. You'll notice if I go now to the next largest breakpoint, Sarah, because I went in and said I want unique type setting attributes per breakpoint, it did not change that text over on this page. It just, on this breakpoint, it just did on the breakpoint that I was working with. And look at that. I've got a fluid width breakpoint, which is pretty odd. I probably did that in all my haste here. Okay. But on that largest breakpoint, 1200, I've got the smaller text. If I jump to the next smallest, I've got larger text. Because I said, allow me to make the text different per breakpoint, I'm able to do that. If I realize I've made a mistake and I've grown and I don't want to go in and create styles and have to apply them, I just kind of want to make sure I have uniform typesetting for some individual element on the page. When I set this toggle to be on, I can always go back to a text object and say, you see this one? Not only do I want you to apply the location across all breakpoints, but if I right click and say copy the text formatting to either a specific breakpoint where I might have varied it and want to undo that change, or all breakpoints. When I do that, it's kind of a way to undo any variances I might have applied on individual breakpoints if I want to do that. So when I jump back, I can see that the text is nice and small now. Okay, so we've got our first breakpoint set. We've got text that's within this range, such that as I drag the edges of the browser, you can kind of simulate this in the application, my text is not going to be too crowded. It's going to fit rather well until I get to the next breakpoint. And then you'll notice that's where I'm jumping into trouble. All right, I've got a few chat points here. Let's see what's going on. Rachel's asking, what does the light dotted line in the text box represent? It's bugs me is what it is. It's a throwback from InDesign. And what it's telling you is that the text in the container may not be fully expanded. So I don't know that it manifests well on the web, in my opinion. But it allows you, if you're looking to align columns, to make sure that the heights of those columns are the same and that you're giving enough clearance to a text object. The engineer that did the work would probably yell at me right now because I'm probably glossing over something. But you're going to want to make sure that text containers are expanded so you don't see that dotted line. It may be that the text you're using in the design canvas within Muse looks fine. It may even look good on your browser, but there's a chance that using a fallback font or a different operating system or a different device or a different browser, the spacing of what you see may be slightly different, and that text container is going to pretty much assure you that the content will be visible across all of those nuances. Okay, so let me go ahead and try to show that dotted line. So I've got text here, and I do have a dotted line. Things are, again, I'm not sure what causes this guy to happen, but I've got some alignment issues going on. Let me just try to change the height of this object. You go ahead and make it 225 pixels high. See how that dotted line went away as I've grown it out. There's probably blanks. Yeah, something's funny. I'm sure you guys never bump into any Muse bugs, but something's being a little funny for me here now. I'm just going to go back and see if I can get this guy in. Yeah, see, I just went, don't ask me why, I went back to site plan, and I'm double clicking, and now the selection is better aligned. It's a good question because there's often, if I click in here, I'll see that there's returns on the text. The other thing I would check as to why this text container wants to be so large would be in the text flyout here. It may be that there's some padding defined here. So there's no padding here. I've got nothing much going on there that alerts me to why I've got so much space. The last thing I would check, and this is a Muse theme file, so I'm not familiar with it, is in the spacings panel. There's your answer. So probably to allow alignment to go better, the Muse themes folks put padding on the bottom of this container. So it's got some pretty heavy padding. If I jump out, let's say just for simplicity's sake, and I select all of these objects, I'm gonna, let's go ahead and let the top and the bottom be 20 pixels in height. And now I'm getting more accurate representation of where my breaks are. Now, if I wanna kind of make sure that things are all perfectly well aligned, notice as I come along here, start to get the dotted line if I resize it smaller than that min height. So I can get at least containers well aligned that have that equal 20 pixel padding both on the top and the bottom. All right, this is how I eat up a whole hour really fast. I'm going to keep going. But notice that in that first breakpoint, things are looking pretty good. I'm kind of happy with that. I could move things up a little bit, but I don't want to be too persnickety here. I'm going to jump to the next breakpoint and look at the guides that I have here. We need to do a little work around our guides behaving across breakpoints. I'm going to delete them from the first breakpoint while I'm here. I'm going to jump to the next smallest breakpoint, and I'm going to give myself a guide or two. So I'm going to mark now where it is my next break is going to occur. I'm going to select everything on the canvas, and I'm going to start to move it up into position here. Now, you'll notice that I need a little bit more white space. The downside for fixed breakpoint designs is that you do end up with some pretty heavy padding on either side. It's just the truth. Because you're wanting to accommodate content, and because it's not flowing, it's got to have extra buffer for the smallest instance of that page. I want to come in and select these text objects again, and I'm just going to, this time, drag them in so that they're within those boundaries. I may like this now as a good starting point for my next breakpoint. So this is where you have to really pay attention. I'm currently on the I'm on the 1000 breakpoint instance here. If I right click and go to copy size and position, I can go to the next smallest. So I may want to copy this current layout to 800 just to get me a little closer to where I want to be. I'm going to get rid of my guides because I don't need them any longer and go to the next smallest breakpoint. Okay. Muse is not perfect. It's trying to guess, and sometimes it's misaligning a little bit here. I'm going to select all these guys. And let's see, I'll go ahead and, I didn't delete my first guide, but it's behaving, so I'll let it be. I'll come in and drop my next guide and get my content here. Now at this point, I might say, you know what, this is just starting to look, well, we're okay because it's a single column. I'm going to come on in, grab that text, and move it into the smaller position. You'll notice everybody got a little crowded there suddenly. So let's see if there's a better way, probably not, to handle that. I'm going to spread these guys out a little bit and zoom out. Now, as I mentioned, all right, there is a way. If I come in and group these guys, I'm going to group that, group this guy, and with them grouped, I can take the smallest, kind of get it out of the way, select everybody, go to my align panel, and distribute the spaces a little more evenly. Kind of a quick way to get there. Now, we're on the smallest breakpoint, and I want that smallest breakpoint to be fluid width. So I'm going to make sure I have that set to be that way. Things changed on me here. This is how live demos go. Let's come in and get one more breakpoint at 600, and I want that to be my fluid width. Somebody's probably going to argue with me about this. Okay. Let's get rid of my guides. And what I might decide for the smallest breakpoint is that it's too complicated to have images and text next to one another. So here's where we can do a little bit of magic. The demo gods have not been nice to me this morning. So this afternoon, what does that tell you? I'm going to select all these objects. And if I hit Shift and Option and grab that triangle towards the bottom, notice how it kind of magically is moving the content. So Shift Option, at least on the Mac, it's moving the content out of the way, but it's not resizing the containers, which is really a lot of fun. I can kind of exaggerate this a little bit, but now that I've done that, I'm going to come in and grab my text objects, and I'm going to bring them down. Oh, I need to ungroup. Let's go ahead and ungroup these guys. I'm going to grab just the text, and I want to move these down, you know, demo gods or demo gods. Try that one more time. I'm going to grab them, move them down on the page. It's looking pretty good. And I'll go ahead and center it. Another nice feature that I really like is if you hold one edge here, like the triangle, and press and drag, it's going to resize, but it's going to do it on one side to the right. If I undo that and I hold the Option key and drag, notice that it ignores me. Hold on. Nope. I told you I'd get this wrong before I got it right. Nope. That's the stagger key. That one's pretty fun. These are all on the keyboard commands. Jeepers. What I want to do, let's just see for a second. If I select this guy, yeah. Okay. So I want to select all of these guys again. And if I hold the Option key, I can resize in a centered manner. So see how it's not being kind to me. Let's try my triangle with the Option key held down. Press and drag. That's interesting. Well, I think I'm learning something, which is that you can hold the Option key on an individual item and it's going to resize both the left and right. So it's a nice way to center objects. It feels like when you hold the Option key with a group, it's going to stagger them in a very odd way. So let's go ahead and just be a little old-fashioned. Drag it to the left, and I'm going to move it over. In fact, I don't have to worry too much. I can leave everything as it is right now, select it all on the canvas, and in the Align panel, center it up. And I'll go ahead and move that towards the center. Now we know that for this breakpoint, let's take a look at what we have here. I'm going to zoom in a little so we can see this. I have that fluid width breakpoint, but I don't have a min width defined. I can either come to the edge here and drag that min width until I get it to where I'd like it to be. As I mentioned, it's really hard to do that precisely. I'm going to hit undo. Instead, I'm going to right click and in breakpoint properties for that min width, make sure that I have, for that smallest breakpoint, make sure that I have it set with a min width of about 380. So that, unfortunately, is going to be the smallest mobile device that I need to accommodate. And I could drag guides here to make sure that things are in a good place. Another way I can work is because I know it's 380, if I go ahead and zoom on out and select all of my text objects one more time, I'm going to go to the Transform panel, and I know it has a min width of 380. I need a little bit of space on either side, so I'm going to set it to 360 and just hit return, which will make sure everything is within the range of what I'd like. I'm going to select all, and in the Align panel, come on in and center it. Now, another approach that I can take, because I've set this smallest breakpoint to be fluid width, which will give me a little bit of relief, is going to be to come to each of the text objects, and I'm now, notice that this is the pink area. It's letting me know that I have a little more room to work with, right? Anything in the pink is going to be visible because this is a fluid width breakpoint. I'm going to come and drag my text out so that it really pretty much fills that whole space just about to the edge there. And then I'm going to make sure that each of those text objects now, instead of being set to fixed in its responsive height and width, I'm going to set it to responsive width, which will cause that text to flow. I don't want my images to be responsive, so although I have a fluid breakpoint now, I don't want the photos to be resizing. That would be kind of disconcerting. The last thing I'll do is select everybody on the page here and make sure that it's pinned to the center of the browser. Because I now have a fluid width breakpoint, I don't want things moving to side there. All right, let's take a look at what we've done so far. I'm going to review it real quickly. I have content here that is on a fixed breakpoint, and I can see that by my pink indicator. What I want to do when I am building out pages with fixed breakpoints is make sure that I have enough margin on either side. I'm going to go ahead and pull down now on File to preview this page in the browser, and let's see how well we did. Okay, we've got that pink area. We can get rid of that pretty soon. We're just going to use this for testing. But I can press and drag and see that right now my content is not flowing or jumping. It's just resizing. As I continue, everything's remaining centered, right? But the margin on the left and right is reducing. When I get a little close to that fixed breakpoint, let's just see if this is behaving. Hold on. Okay. When I get close to that fixed breakpoint, boom, it's going to jump to the next breakpoint. And my content is never going to get too close to the edges. When I get too close, maybe we didn't do one of our breakpoints, maybe that one in the middle. And then we get to our smallest breakpoint. So let's go fix that smaller one. I'm going to hit a keyboard command because I got a lot of breakpoints going on now. I'm going to hit Shift Command on Mac or Shift Control on PC. But Shift Command 5, which is going to take me to the next smallest breakpoint. If I were in a smaller breakpoint, I could hit Shift-Command-6, which would take me to the next largest. But it's a nice way to quickly check your content, especially if you have something selected on the canvas. So Shift-Command-5, we're in good shape. Shift-Command-5 again, we're good on that one. We forgot to do this breakpoint, so you know what? In some ways, I think that this breakpoint could use that same stacking order. So let me show that feature that I talked about a little earlier. I'm going to select everything on the page here. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to copy the size and position to the next breakpoint up, my 800 pixel breakpoint. So now if I jump back up, Shift-Command-6, I've got that set. Now, because it is going to be working with a fixed breakpoint width, I'm going to come in and just resize these guys just one more time, bring them in a little bit, and then I'll let Muse do the alignment for me, align everybody to center, and I'll move towards that center, and I'm going to leave that as pinned because it's a single column. Let's take a look again and see if we are in a bit of a better place. So let's start with our largest breakpoint. Looking good. When I get to where I'm getting a little crowded, I'm jumping each breakpoint. Get into this place, and then when I get to that smallest breakpoint, again, the one optimized for mobile, I might give myself a little more white space on the left and right, but I'm getting a nice fluid breakpoint in that area. I'll show you a nice way that you can actually dissect what's going on in your site design. So let's say I didn't know how this one was structured and I wanted to analyze it. What I can do in Chrome is bring up the inspect mode for Chrome. And let's get some of these controls out of the way here for a second. So in that inspect mode with Chrome, there's this nice little option here for the responsive feature set. When you click on that, it is going to, let's see, responsive. Yeah, got to get this toolbar out of the way. Notice that I have some responsive options here now. I can look at a particular device. So I may come in and say, what's an iPad Pro going to look like? And sort of pan around with it using this sort of touch icon. I can go to a much smaller device like an iPhone 6 and see how that's looking. Again, a little crowded on the sides. I could also select the responsive mode. And this is pretty sweet. It's showing you the exact width of your browser. I can go into 100% of actual size if I prefer. But notice I have a scrubber here showing me the absolute values, and it'll let me really analyze where each of the breakpoints are on this page. So I can see when the jump happens, and I see that numerical value. So a nice little feature there if you're wanting to dissect the structure of a site. Okay, like I said, this is the smallest concept, but I find it worth talking about. So I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions in the chat about what we've just shown. Rachel's happy with her type answer, which is great. In the world of Facebook Live, Alexander has left Muse to go to WordPress. I wish him luck. Muse is not for everyone. Depending on how much you want to get your hands dirty, there are definitely CMS systems that have very robust feature sets. And then Robert, on the other hand, is saying it's a terrific tool for teaching at the Media Arts College. I agree. I think it's an incredible visual design tool for folks that are new to the web. Even if someday you want to go be a hand coder, Muse teaches best practices around, I wouldn't say best practices on how code is generated. It's machine generated code. It's optimized for the browser. If you have a paid hand coder, there's a good chance they can optimize your code even further. But it's a fantastic tool for just understanding best practices on the web and how responsive design works. One thing I did want to mention, one of the decisions that you need to make around whether or not you go with fixed and fluid breakpoints have to do with whether or not you want to also use different scroll effects. So in Muse, if I come back to the application, if I go to the smallest breakpoint and I zoom up on my content, we don't have a huge amount of content here. But for the content that is here, if I wanted to apply a scroll effect and I wanted something to fade into view, let's say, when I select this object and I go to the scroll effects panel, I'm informed that I can't use scroll effects on a fluid breakpoint. And the reason for that is that the Muse team, when they were designing the scroll effects feature, they rely on a fixed distance from the top of the browser to the object to indicate when it starts to animate, whether that be opacity or moving on the page. It's really reliant on what we call a T handle. To be honest, the Muse vendors, third-party vendors, have come up with a fantastic way that you can implement scroll effects on fluid breakpoints. And I encourage you to kind of go check those out. I'm going to show you those in just a second, but I do want to point out that if you're in Muse and you have a fixed breakpoint and you want to apply a scroll effect, you can absolutely do that. So with that object selected, notice that because I'm on a fixed breakpoint here, I can come in and define scroll motion, animation. I can add animation from Edge Animate or Animate CC and scroll or animate that object at the speed of scroll. So that's all handled on fixed breakpoints. I'm going to look at chat real quick. So what Sarah's saying is, do you know why Safari and Chrome choose different responsive look when to preview? Also shows different from when I go to public with Business Catalyst, for example. What's the most right look? Sadly, there is no right. And it has to do with browsers handle things differently, operating systems handle it, different devices handle it different. And that's why I would say two best practices rules is if you're working with a fluid breakpoint, the beauty is as you drag the browser, as long as your design does not break, if you add a breakpoint when things are getting crowded and you're in a fluid layout, you're going to be okay. If you're going with a fixed layout, if you make sure you give enough space on either side, you're also going to be okay. But there are tools that are out there that will simulate all of these different environments, but there is no right. It depends on the device that you're working with. Invariably, your client will have the oldest version of Internet Explorer guaranteed, and that's what they'll look at for right. The Muse team prides themselves on doing the best they can to make sure what you see in the browser renders across many browsers. And we do assure consistency. So we will use what's known as graceful degradation or create fallback images for things like SVG images if an old browser doesn't support it, or CSS effects like a shadow. We do render images so that you get a consistent behavior across all those environments, but there is no absolute that I know of. As I mentioned, there are services that can give you some really terrific feedback about the variances, but I don't know of one way to get it right all the time. Okay, I think we're good on chat there. I'm going to glance at Facebook Live a little bit more. Okay, I promised a couple of tail things I wanted to mention. If you're interested in generating mobile menus well, if you go to muse.adobe.com, be sure to download, I mentioned at the top of the hour, but we have a dot release. Be sure to download that dot release. There's lots of performance improvements and bug fixes. We're headlong into the next release, which will be feature improvements. And it's exciting. I'm having a good time doing some testing with the team, but we're not quite ready to release that yet. So download that bug fix in the meantime. If you come into widgets and you put the word mobile in here, I always have trouble finding this sometimes. You will see mobile menus. And this is something that I built just to allow people to easily come in and build out mobile menus. As I mentioned, we need to do a bit of a better job. There are third-party widgets that allow you to do, using JavaScript, more mobile menu capabilities. The downside is that JavaScript may or may not work across all the browsers. What I'm showing you is using native Muse features. There's no widget addition, but there's about 6 examples of how you could build out menus. There was a request for an easy way to do a mobile menu. If you click on the download source, that just went away here, let's go back. So down at the bottom is a link. You can download this source file and just take a look at how I built out each of the menu examples that I'm offering here. So definitely a good place to hang out. Another one, when we were talking about scroll effects and basically the fact that native Muse will not support scroll effects on fluid breakpoints. Folks in the community have gotten ahead of us a little bit with widgets. And if you, unfortunately, there's not an extraordinary category for this, but if you go to the widget section and at least select, you can try scroll effects. You can also try just effects. I'm realizing we need to kind of dial in on this a little bit more deeply, but effects has lots and lots and lots of different widgets. There are a few that I wanted to showcase that do a terrific job of, it's almost a PowerPoint approach to animating content on a fluid breakpoint. So I grabbed a couple URLs to show you. One is a free one from Muse Themes. They call it Product Reveal or Scroll Reveal. And if we come take a look at that in action, notice that as I scroll down here, it's bringing up a background that is revealing. It's also revealing navigation that's up here and allowing some social media buttons to fly in there. So you can come in and just drop this widget on the canvas and apply some of these opacity scroll effect features for free from the Muse Themes guys. They also have another one that they call the onload animator that's pretty terrific. And I'll let you see the backside of this a little bit. But if we come in and preview this widget, it allows you to make even more sophisticated decisions about how you're going to load content. So notice that these bars are animating as they come into view. If I scroll off, they're animating. I can choose if they animate once or if they animate every time it comes into view. But you can come in and, as I mentioned, it's a very PowerPoint approach to making this happen. I first realized how terrific this was from a Site of the Day submission. So I'm going to jump back and show that site real quickly here with the time that we do have. So if I scroll on down, so I realize how much time has passed. Alchemia. So this is using the on-load animator from Muse Themes, and it's lovely. Well, I'll say it's lovely. The thing about scroll effects is I think good designers know how to apply the feature in a prudent manner so that it actually helps with the design. Notice that the Alchemia fades in as it comes on view, and then it fades away. I can load groups of content here. Notice there's a little album cover here that it basically is going to animate onto the stage and then stop in the middle. The nice part about this is if I have a much smaller breakpoint, that object is still going to animate and stop in the middle of the current browser width. So really smart implementation. If we go and look at how that's engineered a little bit, let's say I'm here on this Muse site and I wanted to try to implement some of this animation. I'll probably blow it with the time we have left because that's how my technical day is going today. But if I came in and wanted to animate these, I can go to the library. Let's just see. And we've got the Muse Themes onload animator. I'm going to place it here on the left. I don't know why, but engineering advises widgets, because of responsive design, put them off to the left. It's usually a safe spot. I then can come into an object. Let's say I wanted the second text block to fade in as I scroll down on the page. Let's go a little lower so that it's off screen. I'll grab this last one. What I want to do is in the second widget that's on the canvas here, there's a graphic style. It's called Animate. I'm going to be lazy and copy that to the clipboard. I need to indicate to this widget which objects I want to apply that animation type. So I'm going to come in and select these two guys here. Actually, I'm not going to select anything. I'm going to go to Graphic Styles, and I'm just going to create a new style. I'll double click, and I'm going to name it exactly what this widget is named. I can call this potato chip if I want, but that name needs to match the graphic style that I've created. And with that style now, I'm going to come in and select an object and apply the style to it. I'm going to come into the options now here and see when I apply animate, there's an animation type, and you'll notice there's a whole bunch. I can do different things. Let's go for Jello. I'm not sure how that manifests. It might be a little shaky. Something tells me. I can also control how long it takes for the animation. Let's do a painfully slow Jello animation of, I assume, 2 seconds. And let's just see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and preview the page in the browser. I did that. Well, there's our Jello. Now, see, I'm not sure why the Jello is applying to everything on the page, but notice as I reload, I can get that Jello approach. So I'm probably doing something wrong in the way I'm setting up the graphic styles, but it really is that easy, even when you do it correctly, and apply it to individual objects to animate the work. All right, folks, you've once again spent another lovely hour with me on different features within Muse. If there are Muse Jam Session topics you want to cover, you can put them in the comment section here on Facebook Live, or just throw them into the Q&A if you're in the Zoom session. And I look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks. Happy summer. I'm going to Bangalore, to where the engineering team is for Muse, next week, and I'm going to spend some time with them to talk about the new feature set and advocate for some of the feature enhancements that I've heard from the users. So wish me luck, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks.